Hey and welcome to the Competitive 40K podcast, brought to you by Vanguard Tactics. This is a Warhammer 40K podcast where we analyse the meta and develop strategies to help you become a better competitive 40K player on and off the tabletop. So Vanguard Tactics first started off as a YouTube channel about a year ago, and it's developed ever since. So I wanted to bring out a podcast to really engage with a lot more people and really help the community to that next level that I possibly can. And the Vanguard Tactics YouTube channel has all been about tactics and strategies, and I thought, why not bring that to a podcast format? We also had a very popular live VT, which we named Ask VT, which was a live show we used to do every other week, and it gained some really great popularity. I interviewed some fantastic guests, and I thought bringing this to an audio podcast where this could be a lot more accessible would definitely be the right thing to do. So in this show, I'm going to go over exactly what you can expect from the Vanguard Tactics podcast going forward. I'm going to run you through the format of every episode and also just kind of get you a little bit in the right frame of mind, ready to sort of learn more about Warhammer Competitive 40K. In this show, I'm also going to introduce you to a couple of my co-hosts, both Ben Jones and Mark Reed, who are some really close friends of mine and also both fantastic players who have developed immensely over the last couple of years, and we're going to be able to share some really fantastic insights. So what I want to do with this podcast is bring you a range of guests, no matter if they're at the very sort of top level of the game, to help those that really want to develop the sort of pinnacle of 40k, and I want to bring on guests which are going to be a lot more potentially relatable to those starting their first ever competition, or maybe they are going to competitions and they want to go maybe 3-2 and sort of really sort of develop a more successful and winning strategy going forward. So hopefully there's going to be something for everyone here, no matter what stage of the game you're at. And if you ever get any questions for the show and you'd like to be featured on the Ask VT section, where we're going to take your top questions and go over them at the end of every show, then all you need to do is head over to our Instagram page, and that is at the Vanguard Tactics. I will just say that again, it's at the Vanguard Tactics. What you can do there is just shoot us a direct message with your question, and we'll take the top picks every week and discuss those and give you some really good insights. One more thing to know is that if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the podcast. We should be available on iTunes, Spotify, and all of your top podcast channels. So if you do subscribe, then you'll be the first to get the releases of every single episode. And what you can also do is head over to our website, www.vanguardtactics, and sign up for one of our free courses there. We do an online series of courses, which one of them is completely for free, the ITC Mastermind, where you can learn everything you need to know about the ITC format to really help your game. And then what you can do is also join our mailing list, where I send out newsletters, top tips, and all things that are going on with what I'm doing in my own journey for 40k. So without any further ado, we're going to head over to this week's episode, where I'm joined by Mark and Ben, and we'll give you a good insight into the show and who we are in a little bit more detail. Hope you enjoy it. Okay, so on today's show, I'm joined by Ben Jones. How you doing, Ben?
Hi guys, I'm good, thank you.
And Mark Reed. How you doing, Mark?
Living the dream.
As I mentioned before, guys, this is the podcast for you if you are interested in competitive 40k. And on today's episode, we're going to keep this pretty brief. This is going to be a bit of an introduction into Vanguard Tactics, what you can expect from this podcast, why you should subscribe, where you can get more information from, and ultimately just give you a really good base knowledge of what this show is going to be about. This is going to be very different in terms of what we're going to produce, and hopefully you guys really enjoy it and you find it a really valuable resource. Now, I obviously am joined by Ben and Mark today, and there will be others that I bring onto the podcast, such as Jack, Dan, and many others that we bring on, and in my opinion, are some of the top players in the UK at the moment, and we're going to bring on players from around the globe as well. So Vanguard Tactics, we formed this about a year ago, literally a year to the date. It was just before Christmas when we formed Vanguard Tactics, and it was all about helping people become a better Warhammer player, and it's evolved ever since that, from a few YouTube videos to now a fully fledged membership site, and also pretty much the only 40k kind of university Warhammer course that there is. And this is something that we're immensely proud of and would love to see you on that as a student in the future. But in today's show, what I'd like to do, first of all, is kind of give you a bit of a background into Ben, myself, and Mark, and kind of what we've got coming up in the pipeline. But before we kind of get into that, Ben, what sort of excites you most about being part of the podcast? Are you a podcast listener? And what sort of things from podcasts do you enjoy?
Yeah, I listen to quite a lot of the more competitive 40K podcasts. I'm excited for the side of it to get to know and meet more people in the community who play these competitive events.
Yeah, and you've been playing competitively now for how long?
I really started playing competitively at the start of 8th. I've played Warhammer since I was about 10 years old, so about 18 years now, but
Yeah.
only competitively for a couple of years.
Okay, and kind of how have you done sort of this year? Is your first competitive season then? Because you've had some pretty outstanding results.
Yeah, so I've had second place at the Warhammer World Heat 3. I've had third place at Battlefield Birmingham.
Yeah.
I've had second place at the RTT, the first Glasshammer one.
Mm-hmm.
I won the second Glasshammer RTT and finished, I can't remember if it was 6th or 7th at Element Games at the Grand Slam.
Yeah, so you're consistently
But
in the
yeah,
top 10 of the
some
events this
good
year.
results. Yeah.
And what sort of faction are you playing at the moment?
I'm playing Aldar at the moment. I have played a little bit of Imperial Fists as well.
But Eldar's
But
your stick in
mainly Craft Worlds at the moment.
So, guys, if you want to know more about Eldar, then Ben is the man to sort of ask. I think you've played majority of the three main Eldari factions, haven't you, between Harlequins, Dark Eldar, and Eldari. So,
Yeah.
when it comes to all things competitive Eldari, then I'm probably going to be shooting you, those questions, mate. So that's it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Yeah, no,
So,
people, please find me as well. I'm on Facebook. I'll answer any questions I can.
and if you do have a question for the podcast on Instagram, you can find us at Vanguard Tactics and just shoot us a message and we can pick up your question, because at the end of every single episode, we're going to be picking the top questions we get that week and covering those for you. And obviously, we'll give you guys a shout out if that's something you want. So anyway, Mark.
Here I am.
Mark, what brings you to the podcast, mate?
I'm looking forward to reaching out to some new listeners. So in the coming weeks, there will be people who will be have the delight of listening to us at maybe 6 o'clock in the morning when they're commuting to work, on the train, in the car, whatever, that sort of thing. The program that we've been putting out for pretty much over a year now over on YouTube is more of a long form discussion, if you like, a bit more in depth. So not everybody's got the opportunity to spend an hour to 2 hours in an evening to sit and watch it, So the podcast, I'm hoping, will reach some new listeners, will enable people to, hear what we've got to say and hopefully get plenty of use out of it as well.
Yeah, and what I've always found extremely valuable, and I think what people have always said to me, Mark, is that you are a fantastic kind of middleman. And what I mean by that is you're extremely good at extracting knowledge, breaking things down, and kind of asking the questions that people want to know. So you're kind of like that perfect sort of intermediate between maybe some of the guests that I bring on, or myself and Ben, and obviously what the listeners are wanting. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you on, Mark. And so, Mark, what have you been up to yourself with 40K at the moment? How long have you been playing competitively?
So I think just 18 months or so competitively. Yeah, I would say, in fact, I think it was June of not last year, the year before, so just over about 18 months. So I was running Space Wolves at the beginning of 8th, not competitively, and then I started with Dark Eldar and ran them competitively. I've moved on to Custodes and Imperium, and then I'm currently enjoying the might of the Space Marines at the moment.
The Iron Hands.
The one.
Yeah, and in yourself, Mark, you've seen tremendous growth, haven't you, over the last 18 months?
Oh, huge! I think the journey that we all went through together was something that we wanted to share with other people. And I mean that from the lessons that we'd learned, we thought there was a lot of valuable information out there that we could pass on to other people. You and Ben are a tier above me for sure, in the competitive standards, and I've learnt loads from both of you guys. So, you were saying earlier that the questions I ask, it's genuinely because I'm interested to understand, so that when I get to the table, I can understand what my opponent's going to do, what I can do. So from people like yourself and Ben, and some of the other guys at VT, I'm always keen to learn, so that I can get better.
Yeah, nice. And obviously, Mark, like you've got such a great kind of knowledge base now in terms of the factions that you've run, and it's been great to see you pick up so many different armies this year, and hopefully you'll kind of like stick with one for next season and really get those reps in, because you're that type of player that the more reps you get in with a list, the better you get. There's some players out there can kind of look at a faction and get good with it straight away, to a decent standard. But Mark, I think you're a real master of your craft, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's what I enjoy as well. I enjoy working towards getting to the point where I know a faction inside out. I know all the stratagems, all the maneuvers. I've seen every attempt to score points against me or to take my units off the board, and I've got a good idea about how to deal with them. And so that fills me with a great deal of confidence. So when I go into a game, I know I can give somebody a real challenge with whatever I'm running.
Yeah, and it was interesting, obviously, at the weekend we were doing a lot of play testing, getting me ready for the LVO, and this is recorded just before I leave to the LVO, and we were doing a lot of play testing, putting my list through its paces, and you and I were playing, and there was a few stratagems you were using, and I was like, they've got what stratagem? Really? And I was like, but bear in mind, I recently won an RTT with Iron Hands, and I went also to Element and came Element Games competition. Out of 100 players, came fifth, and there were stratagems you were using that I just overlooked, but it just shows that you're very diligent, which is exactly what we want on this podcast. So I think that's going to be absolutely fantastic. And guys, what you can kind of expect from us from here on is every single week, myself, Ben, Mark, and maybe one or two other guests that I bring on, is going to be a roundtable discussion around the competitive game. Now, myself, Ben, and Mark, and all the others, we are not win at all cost type of players. That is not what we are about. We're not people that cheat. We are very much all about sportsmanship and making sure that we enjoy ourselves as well as our opponents. But the most importantly, being the best general player at the table. At the end of the day, myself, Ben, and Mark, and you guys listening, we play this game because we like the mental stimulus. We like to be challenged, and we want to bring our A game, essentially. And we only want to win if we are the best general. So hopefully listening to this podcast is really going to help you get there or improve your game. So what you can kind of expect from us from here on is every single week we're going to go over, obviously, a quick intro into any new guests. We're then going to be covering, what you can expect from that show, and the format's going to pretty much be pretty similar. We're going to do something called 40K in Focus. Now, 40K in Focus is going to be a segment on our show where we really delve deep into a particular type of 40K, and that could be a faction, it could be a new detachment that's come up, it could be, like, for example, a certain part of, like, let's say, preparing for a tournament or whatever it might be, something in detail that you're going to get immense value from. And whether you play that faction yourself, or if you're a competitive player, you just want to listen to this to upskill your knowledge so that if you do face it, you know exactly how to handle it. Now, the other thing we're going to do as part of this, we're not only going to go over kind of why you might choose that faction, what they do, how they play, and who it would be for as well. We're also then going to go over maybe some of the top strategies and actually how you go about using that list yourself. So maybe, if you are wanting to start that new army, it could be one you look at. But we're also then, in another segment, we're going to do another segment called Better the Meta. Now, Better the Meta, what I'm going to do with the guys is I'm going to show them a list, before we record this. And those guys are going to get, some good time to sit down and go over a strategy from their perspective on how they would beat that matchup. So let's say, right, Ben, I'm going to present you with a particular type of Tau build. Then Ben, you're going to tell me from an Eldari's perspective what secondaries you're going to take if you play ITC, what, for example, strategies from deployment right up to turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, what tactics you'd be using in order to beat that Tau list to the best of your ability, or to close the gap. So if you know you can't win it on paper, what would you be doing to really sort of edge your bets in the right direction? And then what I'm going to be doing is passing that over to Mark and saying, Mark, maybe from an Iron Hands or a Drakari perspective, how would you go about it? So if you're listening and you're, for example, a more like Trixie, like Glasshammer type of list, Ben Eldari is going to be the one to listen to. I'm going to be talking about things like from a combat perspective as I'm running Blood Angels at the moment, and Mark, maybe to talk it through more from like a threat analysis and maybe sort of a target priority point of view. You guys cool with that?
Yeah, sounds good.
Absolutely.
So that's going to be our two main segments of the show, and then we're going to be also covering the Ask VT. So any sort of pertinent questions, that you guys are, sending in to us on Instagram, we're going to basically answer those. Now, every single week, what I'm going to do is give you show notes. So if there's anything that we're talking about, any sort of cheat sheets or whatever it might be, then all you can then do is go over to the website, which is www.vanguardtactics.com /EP1 or EP2, whatever the episode number is, and you'll be able to find the download that you need to find for anything that we talk about on the show, so you can always stay in the loop of what we're doing, what's going on, and getting any good content. So if I go over the top 3 combos for Chaos, I'm going to write them down, like, so the stratagem names, etc., because I really want to keep you guys up to date. And the other thing what we're going to do in every part of our show, which is a little bit different to everybody else's podcast, is we're going to introduce each show with the time point in which we're recording this. The reason why that is important, because as the competitive game evolves, if you're listening back to this podcast, you know exactly when it was recorded. So it allows you to know, was this before a particular type of codex was released? Was it after a certain FAQ, big FAQ, chapter approved? Just so we can constantly stay on top of the meta and help you improve as a 40k gamer. So, Ben, what sort of goals have you got for this year?
I'd like to place high at all the events I go to. Obviously, I'd like to win a GT of some form this year.
Okay.
And score 5 decent scores before going to next year's LVO.
Nice. So that's going to be the goal then, 2021 LVO.
Yeah. So.
And where are you going to be sort of wanting to? Is it like a top percentage of the ITC rankings, best in faction? What's going to be? Let's try and define this, because then maybe we'll review this next year to see how you're getting on.
Sort of maybe top 20 players in the UK.
Nice.
I don't know about faction Pacific because I do jump quite a bit, but I maybe try and stick with Eldar at the moment.
Yep, nice. And then what, something like top 50 or top 100 of the ITC?
Yeah, that would be brilliant. So you depend on scores at the bigger events, but yeah, that would be a good goal.
And what is it that you most enjoy about competitive 40k versus just maybe playing, I don't know, with more of a sort of lore-based list or something?
It's the challenge of the game and the thought process, and you're playing equal-minded players like our game on the weekend. It's like it's a calculated chess match. What one thing that goes wrong and that's it. They're super close games, and you meet a lot of nice. I've met so many people playing this game. And the more events you go to in the more places, the more people you meet as well.
Yeah, the community is fantastic, and this is exactly why we're bringing out this podcast, is for the community, ultimately, so we can connect with more people. And no, you're dead right, mate. So, thanks for sharing that, and hopefully we see you, in the top 100 for next year, and we can then keep you accountable as well, because that's one of the biggest things, is keeping you accountable. But yeah, like the thing is, like with all things, I'm actually, as we speak, typing up an email all about goal setting at the moment. And there's 3 aspects of goal setting that, in order, because a goal is useless pretty much. If you just say, I want to do this, it's a bit pointless unless you do the following 3 things. And number 1 is have a purpose to do it. So why do you really want to do that? Because it's going to require some sacrifices, whether it's time, money, basically any sort of resources you have, is going to require it. And it's at the point in which you think, okay, well, I actually want to achieve this. So when the going gets tough, you still stick to it. So you really need a quality purpose. And then one of the other things is also a process. So how are you actually going to put one step in front of the other? Because it's all well and good saying, oh, I want to come in the top 100 or I want to win a GT, but obviously we need to put a process in place so you actually get there. And then finally is accountability. Someone to keep you accountable to your goals, to make sure you're sticking to the process, so that when the going gets tough, just to remind you of your purpose, really. So we'll definitely start to create that for you, Ben, to make sure that definitely happens. So, Mark, what about you, mate? What are your goals for this year?
I'm undecided at the moment, and I'm undecided for a
Okay.
very specific reason. The
Mm-hmm.
I probably, out of the group that of our guys from VT that play together on a regular basis, I probably play a bit more ETC than most of the other guys. More book missions, more Maelstrom, things like that. It's just that the circles that I play in outside of my local clubs, move in those circles. So I'm in a competitive league at one of my local clubs at the minute, which I'm just about to progress to the knockout stages, and there'll be a version 2 of that next year. So I'm looking to try and pick that up and win it, in both aspects. I've done quite well with Drukhari this year. I
Mm-hmm.
ended up at 4-1 at Battlefield Birmingham with a best in faction. I think I finished 11th out of about 100. So it's been a progressively successful year for me this year, and I think that the best in faction is a viable, is something to reach for, if you like. So the reason I'm not sure is because that I'm
Yeah.
hoping that the Space Wolves are going to get a Psychic Awakening buff. I'm considering running them for 12 months for the ITC season, and to see if I could get into the best in factions ranking and how far I could get up. If I could spend a year playing them, if I could become one of the top Space Wolves players, I'd be really interested in that. We'll have to see how those buffs come out, and if they're worthy, you know what I mean, of that sort of time and effort. So I'm looking to go on to progress from what I've achieved this year. It's been a great year. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and most of all, I've had loads of fun going to tournaments with my friends, meeting loads of people, and having a good time. That's the overriding emotion, you know what I mean, that I think about, is that I've had a thorough amount of fun, playing Warhammer around the country with friends.
No, and that's exactly it. That's what we always say. No, even if you do terrible at an event, often it's just a case of getting you away. And for me, the beauty of this game is all about actually, improving, social circles. And it gets me away from my laptop and my phone, and also it's really good for my mental health. There's something about it that just really helps me. And it was that sort of missing piece that I needed in my life, and it's why I'm so supportive of the hobby, and why I can't wait to tell people about it, and why I'm doing what I'm doing now, and really embracing it. So it's great to have you boys along with me. And there's nothing better than, like, even at the weekend we got in 3 quality games against each other. Really play testing and getting ready for getting me ready for the LVO, which is basically in 2 weeks. So that's going to be, like, in terms of my goals.
Yeah, I was going to ask the same question.
So I think my goals really for this year, I want to try and get into the top 100 of the ITC rankings by the end of the LVO season. So that finishes at the end of the LVO, the end of the ITC season, which ends at the LVO. And I stand in a pretty good chance to do that. I think I'm like 106 or something around there at the moment. It's time recording, so I'd really like to just creep into that top 100. And for next year, I've got some really exciting things planned, which I cannot, wait to talk about. But For me, I think my purpose is that I am a real kind of what's the word? I'm very hungry to learn more about the game and see how far I can go. That's always been the thing that when I used to compete in bodybuilding, it was how far can I go with this? How far can I push myself? How deep can I go down the rabbit hole? And ultimately, what is going to come out at the other side of it? And that's what I'm most interested in, is the journey for me, because I know that journey is going to actually teach me a lot. It's going to teach me a lot about dedication and commitment, desire, and all those things that you need in order to be successful at anything. So that's really what I want to get out of this, is the journey. And I think for my ultimate goal next year, I would love to finish LVO 2021. I'd love to finish in the top 20, maybe ideally in the top 8. That would be my goal. And overall in the ITC rankings in the top 10. That's where I want to finish, top 10 next year. So end of 2021 season, or it's weird because obviously it finishes in January. So end of 2020, we'll call it. So this time, sort of next year, in the top 10 of the ITC. And if I can win a best in faction along the way, then great. But like Ben, and because of the channel and obviously what we do here, I like to move from faction to faction. So I've got a really good knowledge base of everything I'm talking about, because it's one thing just looking at this stuff on paper, but it's really something else when you get on the table and start to put stuff in practice. Is we always talk about practice makes perfect. So yeah, does that kind of sum up, guys?
Yeah, definitely.
Spot
on. So with LVO around the corner, I am going to be taking Blood Angels. And obviously you guys have helped me put together my list every day. I think I'm putting something different in the group, aren't I, about what I'm thinking?
You certainly are.
It's
very good.
It's interesting to see the evolution of it from where it started. You know, if you'd have said 6 months ago, you know, you're going to take Blood Angels to the LVO, we'd have thought you were drunk. But it's amazing
Yeah.
the buffs that these things are getting. I think we've said this before, actually. You know, 12 months ago, if you said that we, you know, you two were going to go to Element Games tournament, and one are you going to play Iron Hands, and one are going to play Imperial Fists, you'd gone, you're absolutely crazy. But things have been evolving in a crazy way over the past sort of 3 or 4 months with the releases that they've had. So any faction could be up for grabs. So my favourite Elusian Starstriders could get a buff that makes them mega, and I'll be there ready with those models ready to go.
I'm calling it now.
Yeah.
Mark's going to win the LVO with Starstriders.
Well, there was actually one person that took a detachment of them, and it was before the rules were changed for mono faction, and I think he won best in faction for taking them once to one tournament and getting beat for 5 games. So it's realistically, anybody who wants to go best in faction, that's my tip. Yeah, it's
just set the bar real low.
You're tripping over it. It's that low.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good goal, Mark. I think you should do it. Yeah. Starstriders for the win. Anyway, so getting back to competitive 40k. Yeah, so Blood Angels is going to be, I'm not sure quite yet. I feel I still got a little bit of testing to do, but I've been putting this list through some rigorous testing. I was just thinking the other day how many things I've put this list into. I've gone up against Tau, Eldar, Dark Eldar, Imperial Fists, Iron Hands, Raven Guard, or like Dark Angels, with all the buffs we could possibly think of that they may get in their next Psychic Awakening. I've literally put it into every major, including Chaos as well, faction, and I feel the best prepared I've ever felt for a tournament, which I can't ask for more than that. And then it's going to just come down to at the event matchups, you know, because competitive, when we talk about competitive 40k isn't really competitive in a single game, because there are so many variables. You know, the board that you'll put on, you know, maybe terrain could be really light on your side, the side that you get put on, the deployment map, the list that you're up against in that particular game, you know, are they just an extreme hard counter to your list? That was a variable or luck or unlucky to get that draw, for example. And then there's also, even if you've got two extremely skilled players, then there's an element of dice, there's an element of variability there. So competitive 40k, a lot of people say, oh, it's unbalanced and all this kind of stuff, but really the game is becoming more balanced as best as it can. But we can't look at 40k competitively in a single game or even in a few games, but we can start to look at the game competitively over a season when the cream rises to the top, right?
Yeah, I agree. Over the course of a season, consistently, it's the player, not the matchup. Yeah,
All
I
the
mean,
dice
certain
rolls.
games you can't do anything about, but like going second with no terrain to 6 Iron Hands Flyers, you just, you can't really play much into that as a player. But over the course of, like, if you're going to win LVO 9 games, you've got to be consistently good.
Yeah, and your list has got to be able to deal with the gatekeepers, the threats, that you've got to come at from different angles. I would say you're unlikely to play, 9 Eldar armies. You maybe come against Guard and an Imperium, Space Marines. Whatever it might be, it's going to get tested in all facets.
Yeah, and at the moment, as recording this, obviously we are in a sort of marine meta at the moment, aren't we?
Very much. I wonder how many Space Marine armies are going to see at the finals next weekend.
Yeah, because you've got the Warhammer World finals,
this
haven't you?
weekend now.
This weekend coming, yeah. And how do you feel prepared? Do you feel prepared for that?
Yeah, I'm still unsure on what list I want to take, but I think it will probably be the Seer Council. But again, as you said, it's just that.
Yeah.
If you get that one board where there's nowhere to hide and you go second, that's the crux of it, really. I can play the missions against anyone, I think, with that army. Yeah.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think again, after testing it the weekend, it's a brutal list, and you're an extremely great pilot with it. So it's going to be, really good to see how you get on with that. Another friend of the show, Joe, he's also going to be at the GT finals with you. So we'll be interested to see how he gets on. And another friend of the channel, Chris, it'll be interesting to see how he gets on with his incredibly beautifully painted orcs. He's got the craziest orc color scheme I've ever seen. But
I think there's a couple of other lads out the VT group going as well.
Yeah, I think there's hopefully it could be a VT 1, 2, and 3, maybe. Who knows?
Well, usually one of us boys knocks each other out, so probably end up knocking Joe or me will knock each other out.
Yeah. At the most recent RTT I did, I ended up knocking Joe out, and then you knocked me out of Element Games, didn't you?
That was such a close game as well. It's and there was a cheeky seize in there, which made a whole lot of difference.
Yeah, let's not talk about that. Yeah, still brings back bad memories. Anyway, so we've got a question. So we'll move on to our Ask VT segment, and I posted this into our mentorship group for all of our students, and I said I need a question for the podcast, and Mike's come forward with a great question, and that is, what do you see as the biggest challenge facing people trying to break into the competitive meta or scene, whether they are a casual gamer or someone completely new to the game? How could they work over to overcome it, or what can they do to overcome it? So I'm going to put that question over to you, Mark, as I think you're going to be someone that's going to have a good insight on that. So what do you think the challenges are for people that are thinking about playing competitively, or whether maybe they don't know if it's for them or not? What would you say? Because I would like to know what you first felt when I said, Mark, you need to come to this tournament, how you were feeling about it at that time.
There's two things that spring to mind immediately when you ask that question. So the first and most important is time management. So it's making sure that you know your army, your faction well enough to be able to play the game, the phases, and get the maximum amount of turns in. It doesn't matter whether you are tabled in every game, because if you're just starting out, winning one game is I would say a legitimate success going to any first tournament. So the pressure you're going to put under yourself to make sure that you can complete each of your games and go to, if it's ITC, 6 turns. So you really need to have played enough games with your mates to know your stratagems, know how your army works, not be looking stuff up, to know it inside out, and maybe look the odd thing up, you know what I mean, but not, right, when you ask me a question, I'm going to flick through the pages every time, because you're just not going to get a great deal of enjoyment out of it. Your opponent's probably not going to get a great deal of enjoyment out of it because you might be concerned that you're not going to get all the turns in. So I think that there's work that can be done very easily on that before you go to make sure that you're prepared for it. The second thing I would say is knowing your opponent's army list. Knowing how it plays, knowing what units do what, and that's difficult. But the only way is to go to tournaments, in my opinion. It's one of the reasons to go to tournaments, and in the mentorship that we've given to people over the past 12 months or so, it's something I've repeated to people. Don't be afraid to go to a tournament. One of the huge bonuses for going to a tournament will be that you get to probably play 5 people you've never played before and 5 factions you've never played before, and pick their brains and say to them, hey, could I have done this better? What do you struggle against? If you're a good guy, you know what I mean, and you're friendly, they'll tell you all sorts of stuff that's mega helpful for the next time that you play that faction. And I think that you need to get some tournaments under your belt before you've come across enough of the lists so that you can start to feel confident when you come up against something. So it's right now. I've got firepower. I know how to deal with this. I'll do this. I'll do X. I'll play this here. So those were the 2 things I would definitely say are the 2 biggest issues, if you like, going into the competitive scene.
No, I think it's a couple of great points, and I can give some maybe little tips at the end of this to how we'd go about solving some of those things, which is absolutely fantastic, Mark. And Ben, have you got any thoughts on what people that that just they think maybe tournaments aren't for them, or any fears that you
my
had?
thought of it is you just go for it. You'll meet lots. I've played several people. Maybe if it's your first time, just say to the person you're playing that I've never played one of these events before. Like I've played several people in ITC games, and if they're a new player, you help them even pick the secondaries for them. Because in all realistic, unless they're a very good player who's never been before, they're probably not going to beat you in their first game. So you just make the game as enjoyable for them as you can. But it's I went to my first tournament, Battlefield, and I was like, I didn't know what to expect, and I managed to do really well. Actually, I won my first 2 games with my Playbush crawler list. I have like 6 or 7 Playbush crawlers, and then this was before the rule of 3. And then what did I meet on the table for round 3? My 3rd game, Manny with his Poxwalker thing, and the game I got absolutely wiped out. I was gone after 2 turns, but I had such a great time, and I still speak to these people regularly now. But and I also I met you guys at the tournament. I actually met you, Steve, playing you at Greetings. That's the first time we met each other. It's just a great way of getting out there. I mean, I think if you're thinking about going, just go and give it a go. Everyone's really good. I've never had a bad tournament game, to be fair.
Yeah, and what we'll do another podcast on how to prepare for a tournament. And just a few things really like to sort of conclude on what you guys have said. I think number 1 is have the right expectations. So if it's your first tournament, don't worry about winning anything. Just go in, have 5. Just go. Your goal should be to complete 5 games. That's your goal. If you make a friend along the way, even better. Because that friend could be somebody maybe you share lists with in the future, you connect with, you maybe meet up and have a playtest game against, just somebody else that's like-minded, that likes to go to tournaments, maybe as someone you split a hotel room with on another occasion, go for food with. It's that kind of stuff is the best thing about the community and the best thing about tournaments. So number 1, set your expectations in the right place. Number 2, as Mark said, know your rules. So if you're constantly referring to your codex, I remember a time when Mark, if you don't mind me mentioning this, Mark, but I had to take your codex off you, didn't I? One game. Because Mark was just relying on it too much. And I was like, Mark, the only way you're going to play without it is I took it off him and I said, right, tell me how far you move. And you were like, well, I think it's this. I was like, it is that, you're right. But you've got to have that confidence. And, you know, if you're playing someone and you say, look, it's my first time playing, I'm going to do the best job I can to get to the end of this. If I get anything wrong, please let me know. We can check it, get a TO over, whatever it needs to, but it won't be my intention to deliberately bend the rules or whatever. It's just my first time. And I'll be like, yeah, no worries, man. Because if you and me were playing and you're new and you said, right, I think my guardsman moves 20 inches, I'll be like, I think you move 6, mate. We can just check if you want. But I'm not going to think that's you cheating. That's just you getting something slightly wrong, because I know how it was intended. And I think there's a big fear about a few things. And number one is, and I think in a way, the video that I put out on YouTube kind of didn't help in a way, but in a short term, but in the longer term, it will. It brought to light somebody that did cheat against me persistently. But I'll be honest, that was one person. And how many games of 40k have I played this year? 200 maybe?
That's what I mean. I've been to 7 events this year, and I've been to one where in Gibraltar where there was a language barrier as well, and I still haven't had a bad game.
I've played at ETC twice. Played in the singles there, the team event. I've played in SoCal, California, going to the LVO. I've played all across Britain. I've got multiple friends from different nations and countries, and it was one game that I had, but it just happened to be against the second time I played this person and the second time they did the same old tricks. In the short term, a lot of people said, oh, this is why I don't play tournaments, but you're only seeing a very negative aspect of it. And in reality, what's going to happen now is that's going to be eradicated from the game because it's coming to light. And that's exactly why I put the video out, is to improve the game and improve the community so we can crack down on anyone that does behave like that and get rid of them through a legitimate card system where they get a ban or whatever it might be, and a reasonable punishment for the crime, so to speak, without any slagging off and slandering and all that horrible stuff that can sometimes go on. Just a clean way of having a good process. Now, the great thing is that TOs have really rallied around it. People have messaged me, and the thing is now there's much better systems coming in place. There's more referees going to events now, or TOs are investing in referees to play at event, to referee at events, so that we're seeing better TOs, we're seeing better referees, we're seeing better organisation, we're seeing better rules packs. Like even I was fortunate enough that GW got in contact with me to ask me some things about the code of conduct for their event. So they've now got a code of conduct in all of their event packs, which 6 months ago they didn't have. So the game is improving. So don't be afraid of those things. If you have a bad problem with somebody, all you need to go is go and see a TO. It's that simple. So don't be afraid about anyone else. And as Mark said, time, the best thing you can do is take your book away from you, play with confidence, and just revise it. Like I remember me and you, Mark, on the way to greetings, I was quizzing you in the car.
Yeah, I think that happened on numerous occasions, especially when I think you wrote me a list that added in some craft world stuff as well. So we did it for that as well. What the powers go off and stuff like that. It's immensely helpful. And the reason I said this, was the answer to the question was I'm speaking from a place of that I understand that that's an issue because it was an issue for me starting out. Like remembering every line of every unit that you've got is quite tough at the start when you start competitively. But what happens is the more you do it, the easier it gets. So when I have 4 armies now, and I pick up rules quite quick and I remember them quicker. So it's just a journey.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And I think
knowing rules is massive part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, and do you know what? I saw somebody the other day playing, and this is the problem, is that in their army that I think they had one of everything. when if you want to learn your rules, take one unit, take it as many times as you can. So if you're going to take intercessors, don't take infiltrators, incursors, scouts, intercessors with this weapon, intercessors with that weapon. Just take one unit of intercessors, the same weapon loadout, take it 6 times, rinse, repeat, and get used to what that unit does, and you will master that unit. Then reassess it. And this is stuff we teach on the mentorship, is in a lot more detail about how to actually construct your list properly. And hopefully this podcast will be a great resource for you guys to go over other people's factions, so you've got a good idea of what you're up against out there, and give you that confidence to, in ultimately, hopefully, you'll have the confidence and also the right attitude when you do go to events. So when you are there, you feel in control at the table, because there's nothing worse than feeling completely lost, like you don't know what you're doing, you're just going to lose, and you don't even have a chance. So hopefully listening to this podcast, the resources, the cheat sheets as well, like Mark, I made you an Eldar cheat sheet, didn't I, with all the powers you have to cast in what order.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, that was
It's
really
like
helpful.
I took my Imperial Fist to Element Games. That was the first time I'd used them, and I went through a 5-round tournament and didn't use my Apothecary at all until the last game.
Yeah,
Just because he was new, and chaplain, didn't use my chaplain until the last game.
you just focused on the basics, didn't you?
Kept forgetting the litanies, and then it's too late to roll them, and then I'd forget them the next turn. I was just like, I just give up. I may as well just put him in the case.
Yeah. You got to just keep it simple. In regards to time, I remember literally a time when you and me were playing Mark, and I would force you to play on a chess clock, didn't I, before events to get you ready.
Yeah, and it was really helpful. So
I think you swore at me at the time, though.
surely not, Stephen. That's
Yeah.
not people that know me know I'll never do that. So I think that discipline of having a certain amount of time, and also one of the things that I say to people when I present my chess clock, which I always play with these days at every tournament, I say, okay, I said, look, this is more for me than for you, because if I want to take a long turn at some point, because something is there's critical steps I need to take at a certain point in the game, you know that I'm using my own time, not yours, so that's stress free for my opponent, and I
And you as
genuinely mean
well.
that. Yeah. So and then I know, right, okay, the next turns I've got to take quick turns, but I've done what I needed to in that turn to set the groundwork for me to win the game.
Yeah, I think the chess clock is actually the best tool for a beginner, because you learn to play based on what you need to do rather than what you just can do or want to do. So what you need to do is how you need to play. And also, if you want to sit there and take all of your time up in the first turn, go ahead. That's your opponent is not going to care, because you just get to play your game at your pace. If you just want to play one turn and just take an hour and a half for it, that's fine. Your opponent will still get 6 turns in. So you're not actually, it's like a kind of a mutual amount of respect for each other, isn't it? So and you'll get used to playing on the clock. And when you're practicing with your friends, just say, look, can I use a clock, just to get used to timing how how long my turns take. So there's loads of tools that we're going to go over in a lot more detail on these podcasts. And if you do get a question on any of this stuff in particular, do just go over to Instagram and shoot us a message at Vanguard Tactics. It will be in our inbox, so every time we come to record, it will be there, and the best questions we'll go over. Anyway, Ben, Mark, thanks for joining me on this tonight show.
Welcome, mate.
Yep, thank you.
And guys, thanks for listening. So we'll see you on another episode of Vanguard Tactics. Once again, guys, thanks so much for checking out the podcast. Make sure you subscribe. And if you wouldn't mind, give us a review on iTunes or Spotify if you enjoyed the podcast over the next coming weeks. So we're going to aim to release a podcast every single week for you, and that should be released on a Friday. So hopefully you can look forward to that before the weekend, no matter what you're up to, or maybe you save it for your next weekly commute to work. Anyway, guys, we'll see you next week on another episode of the Competitive 40K podcast, brought to you by Vanguard Tactics.